The article goes, "History, they say, repeat itself and is a great teacher." On 4th April 2025, the Singapore PM Lawrence Wong announced in a message to his countrymen, "My fellow Singaporeans, I said before that the world is changing in ways that will disadvantage small open economies like Singapore." Some had previously questioned this assessment, but the recent Liberation Day announced by the US leaves no room for doubt. It marks a seismic change in the global order. The era of rule-based globalization and free trade is over. We are entering a new phase, one that is more attributary, protectionist, and dangerous. For decades, President Trump has argued that the US should use tariffs to boost its economy. His logic has been that such tariffs will encourage US consumers to buy more American-made goods, increase the amount of tax raised, and lead to huge levels of investment in the country. Trump wants to reduce the gap between the value of goods in the US buys from other countries and the value of those it sells to them. He argues that America has been taken advantage of by cheaters and pillaged by foreigners, BBC Jennifer Clark quoted. Finally, the D-Day arrived, and on 2nd April 2025, President Trump announced tariffs that shook the world. These tariffs include 49% on Cambodian products, 46% on Vietnamese imports, and an extra. Finally, the D-Day arrived, and on 2nd April 2025, President Trump announced tariffs that shook the world. These tariffs include 49% on Cambodian products, 46% on Vietnamese imports, and an extra 34% on those from China, in addition to 20% tariffs previously announced. Goods from the EU will be taxed at 20%. The cost of a car made using parts from Mexico and Canada alone would rise by $4,000 to $10,000, depending on the vehicle, according to the analysis at the Anderson Economic Group. The chance of a recession rose to 50% after Trump's announcement on new tariffs, according to the former International Monetary Fund chief economist Ken Rogoff. Lessons from history. In the 3rd century BC, during the Han Dynasty, China used its military power to maintain the Silk Road for its value for trade. In the year 30 BC, Rome conquered Egypt in large part to have a better supply of grain. There is a truth that in our world, a lot of deals and wars have been fought over economic self-interest. Hunter Nortage in the WTO writes that a single page of text from 1941 Atlantic Charter is a powerful remembrance of the fact that global rules that underpin our multilateral economic system were a direct reaction to the Second World War and desire for it to never repeat. The Atlantic Charter was agreed upon by Winston Churchill and Franklin D. Roosevelt at a critical moment when the United States were considering entering the war. Comprising 8 Succinct clauses, the Charter sets out common principles on which both countries base their hopes for a better future for the world. The fundamentals underpinning this historic charter have suddenly been shaken after 70 years of relative peace. That too by the USA, who, as the Singapore PM said, was the bedrock for the free market economics for the world. It championed free trade and led efforts to build a multilateral trading system anchored by clear rules and norms, where countries would achieve win-win benefits through trade. The 1941 Voyage and Atlantic Charter. At a time when the world was in the throes of its bloodiest conflict, Roosevelt and Churchill grasped the symbiosis of global economic collaboration and enduring peace and security. Their secret meeting in 1941 off Newfoundland, Canada, was daring and historic. The Atlantic Charter they agreed to then became not only to the genesis of several remarkable achievements of multilateral international economic rulemaking, including the Journal Agreement on Tariffs and Trade and Bretton Woods institutions, but also paved the way for an unprecedented era of relative peace and security. However, a brilliant mind that influenced this historic and profound change to world other ties than United States Secretary of State, Cordell Hull. He recognized that the Great Depression in the 1930s set off a vicious spiral of trade retaliation that saw 2/3 of the world trade wiped out, worsened unemployment, and eventually contributed to the outbreak of devastating war. Hull was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1945 for co-initiating the United States. In 1937, he declared that enduring peace and the welfare of nations were insolubly connected with the maximum practicable degree of freedom international trade. The Atlantic Charter is a one-page document of 8 conscience clauses that set out common principles on which countries of the free world would base their hopes for a better future for the world. Clause 4 states, they will endeavor, with due respect for their existing obligations, to further the enjoyment of all states, great or small, victor or vanished, of access on equal terms, to the trade, to the raw material of the world, which are needed for the economic prosperity. Clause 5 states, the desire to bring out the fullest collaboration between all nations in an economic field in the object of securing, for all, improved labor standards, economic advancements, and social security. Thus, the Charter recognized the essential oneness of the nations, the deep underlying unities. True to their convictions, the two leaders did not try to ruin German trades by all kinds of additional trade barriers and hindrances, as was the mood in 1917. What happened in the 1930s? Harry Dexter White from UK became a key architect of the Bretton Woods system that, in time, would lead to the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the World Trade Organization. Writing in 1942, White articulated the absence of a high degree of economic collaboration among the leading nations will, during the economic decade, inevitably result in economic warfare that will be a prelude and instigator to military warfare. The retaliatory trade barriers of the 1920s and 1930s included the United States' smooth holiday tariffs in 1929. The United Kingdom responded with emergency tariffs in 1931 and the 1932 Ottawa Agreement to deepen discriminatory imperial preferences with its dominance. Hull lamented that Britain had closed like an oyster shell. The aftermath was a dramatic 66% decline in world trade by 1933. This further fueled the Great Depression and contributed to the Second World War. EU chief Ursula von der Leyen warned that the consequences will be dire for the millions of people around the globe. China has announced additional 34% on US goods from April 10th. Australia's Anthony Albanese said this is not the act of a friend. South Korea's acting president Han Duck-soo said the global trade war has become a reality. Japan said its 24 levy was extremely regrettable and could violate World Trade Organization and US-Japan agreement. Some economists are already drawing a parallel between the 1930s beggar thy neighbor tariffs and those of the recent Liberation Day. In 1941, Churchill's battleship HMS Prince of Wales arrived at Placenta Bay off the shores of Newfoundland after 5 days of avoiding German U-boats. President Roosevelt on the heavy cruiser USS Augusta and his flotilla greeted him. In those hours of light, within the darkest years, both the United States and the United Kingdom fathomed the relationship between global economic collaboration, open trade, and enduring peace and security. However, their historic Atlantic Charter, an unsigned harbinger of peace, seems to be dead. Will the warning of the Singapore PM that we must brace ourselves for more shocks to come to pass?